What I thought I would do is spend about half an hour or so talking about the book and the vision for the book and how we're thinking it might be used in the UK, and then finish up by talking a little bit about the global aspirations for it and how it might be used and so on. And then to leave plenty of time for questions and discussion. And we're going to be collecting the written questions in a written form as we go along. So anytime you feel that you want to say something or ask a question, just put it in the chat or write it as a question, and it will get communicated to me, and then we'll pick it up when I finish talking. I think with things like this, it'd be really great to have a sort of really full two-way dialogue, but I think with the numbers involved, it's not always feasible. So we'll see how it goes. Okay, without further ado, let me talk a little bit about the book and what it's intended to do. The title changed quite a few times while we were in the process of writing it, and then actually changed again when the publisher got to it. We were going to call it I was going to call it the Stop Smoking Pill, and the reason was it was going to be a kind of I guess a slightly ironic take on the idea that there's a pill for every ill, and in this case it's a book, obviously not a pill. But what we found was that publishers didn't get the joke, so we had to change it. Probably just as well because smoke-free actually is such a huge concept and such a huge brand, certainly in the UK, that I think it does connect with people now. People think of smoke-free, particularly hyphenated or as one word, as it's almost like a word in the language now, and I imagine that will probably be the case as we extend these concepts further around the globe. We called it a revolutionary way to stop smoking. Now that was where we still allowed ourselves a little bit of a pun or play on words, in that it's revolutionary in one way, which is that for a book it's revolutionary because what it seeks to do is just simply tell the truth about the best ways of stopping smoking. When I was approached to do the book, the agent who approached me said that what smokers really need is someone who really knows what they're talking about to give a truly honest, dispassionate set of advice and information, rather than proposing a magic cure. So obviously the very popular book that's out there at the moment is Alan Carr's Easy Way to Stop Smoking. And it has many strengths and positive features, but clearly it isn't the way to stop smoking, and it doesn't have a scientific basis to it. So it is in some way oddly revolutionary to be talking, really focusing on the truth. Funnily enough, even in books that are written by colleagues and scientists about how to stop smoking manuals, and I see quite a lot of them, for some reason, when it comes to giving tips to smokers about how best to stop, they do seem to fall into the trap of offering advice that really just doesn't have any evidence base for it. And so what I wanted to do with this book is be totally honest with smokers about what we know and what we don't know, and where something is going to be an opinion, and I do give opinions in it, but make it absolutely clear that that's what it is. The other way in which it's revolutionary is that stopping smoking is a bit of a revolving door, and a really, really important message in the book is that we mustn't think of a quit attempt as a failure if it doesn't last for very long, if it lasts for 3 months or a week or even a few days. The way that people stop, and the only guaranteed way of stopping is to keep trying. And so when you keep at it, that is the thing that makes the difference. And we've got so much evidence now that the thing that really makes the difference, most of all, is continuing to make quit attempts. So anyway, that's really just by way of introduction. I'm just now going to go to tell you a little bit more about why I wrote the book. The first thing, obviously, that would be attractive to any publisher is the idea that there's a lot of customers out there. Obviously, there's around 1 billion smokers, and we know, at least in most countries that have been looked at, we've got the ITC survey, we've got quite a lot of surveys which tell us that this is probably an underestimate, but at least 100 million of them are trying to stop every year. Many of them many times in that year. So there's a lot of activity going on. Frankly, it's probably more than 100 million. In the UK, it's about 40% of smokers who try to stop in any given year. About 80 or more percent will have tried to stop in their lifetime. In the States, it's very similar. Even in countries that we don't think of as having a very strong tobacco control climate, the proportion of people trying to stop is more like in the sort of 20 or 30%. So at least 100 million. Now, the trouble is that only a very, very small minority of those are using anything like what we would consider, on the basis of all the science that's been done out there, to be an evidence-based method. So I would probably put the estimate at something in the region of 10 million or less. So these are the happy folk, and you know, good for them, and we want them to carry on doing that. But we also want to give them advice on how best to do it. For example, if they're going to use a nicotine replacement product, we want them to be using it properly. But then that leaves the 90-odd million who are using methods that limit their chances of success, and this is a massive wasted opportunity. And you know, we're talking, well, hundreds of thousands of lives that are lost unnecessarily by people making all the effort, putting the effort into trying to stop smoking, but not using a method that's going to give them the best chance of success. So if only we could get every smoker who tried to stop to use evidence-based methods, we would be saving tens of thousands, if not more, lives a year. And obviously that's a huge, huge goal. And if we can do it with a popular device, such as a book, we've obviously got websites, smartphone apps and so on, but still it remains the case that books are still you know, terrifically important way of disseminating information and giving advice, and people buy books in their millions and millions. So there's an opportunity there. So how can we achieve this? And what, as I say, I tried to do is to focus really about the truth of stopping smoking. When I was originally approached by this agent to write a book on a popular book for smokers, I, to be honest, wasn't very keen, and the reason was that how could I compete with Alan Carr and so on, who just promised that stopping smoking is going to be easy? You know, it's a very nice sell, and the sell that I'm trying to put across maybe is quite a bit harder. But actually, in discussion with the agent and with a number of other people, it became apparent that probably the reason why Alan Carr's book is so popular is not that it's offering an easy way, because smokers aren't that stupid. They know it's not easy. It's because it's the only book out there that has got this sort of mass market appeal. It's the book that everyone's heard of. And actually, and I get this a lot from journalists, I do a lot of television, radio and newspaper interviews, and more so since the book's come out. And there is genuine interest in what works, what doesn't work, and the truth. So I thought, well, yeah, okay, maybe there is a market for a book that tells the truth. Time will tell. The book is selling very well in the UK at the moment, but we shall see whether this pans out. But I think I'm optimistic. Okay, so what is the truth? The first thing is, as it says in one of the best films of all time, Monty Python's Life of Brian, in one of the scenes, Brian, who's this character who seems inadvertently attracts a following of people who think he's a religious leader when he isn't. He's standing on the balcony and he says, "You are all different." And they all repeat in unison after him. They say, "Yes, we are all different." And so that's what that picture is. It's a picture of the crowd saying that we're all different. And of course, we're all different and we're all the same. But when it comes to stopping smoking, the thing that you see time and time again is that people find different routes to stopping smoking. That anyone who says this is the way to stop smoking, this is the only way to stop smoking, is talking nonsense. So we have to recognize that. The second thing is that, as I said earlier, the best chance that anyone has of stopping smoking is to keep trying. And the evidence is that every time you try, it's another roll of the dice. So the fact that you may have tried once, twice, 50 times before actually doesn't influence your chances of success the next time you try. Some people who I work with think that it actually improves your chances, but the evidence doesn't show that. The evidence shows that your chances are exactly the same. There's one caveat to that, which is that if you make a quit attempt very soon after a failed quit attempt, then your chances are reduced. So you don't necessarily want people to be trying to quit every week, but you do really want people to be trying to quit every year, and if not possibly slightly more often. That's the thing that will make the difference. And the absolute guaranteed way of not stopping smoking is not to try. And the only way you are going to succeed is to keep trying. So there's a positive message in there for smokers, which is that even if they've tried 50 times in the past, their chances of success the next time are actually not affected by that. Next time could be the time. There's so much luck involved. You know, when in medicine, when we're doing clinical trials and we're trying to interpret the results, in our field, we grossly overplay the power of our interventions to make a difference to people's lives. There's so much that goes on with smoking cessation that is completely out of our control and their control. I mean, you know, stressful episodes, parties, the sheer randomness of life. Now that works against you for a given quit attempt, but it works in your favor if you're making multiple quit attempts, because it's just like buying a lottery ticket. If you just keep buying the tickets, you improve your chances. The third thing about in terms of the truth, which I wanted to get across to people, is really to look at every quit attempt as a success. And so in the book, it is completely and universally positive. I don't think, if there is a negative message in there anywhere or a negative sentence, then it's accidental, and it's because I forgot to take it out, because I wanted the book to be really completely positive. And I think there's every reason to think of a quit attempt as only a positive, for various reasons. One of them, which I talk about in the book, is the evidence that simply the mere fact of stopping inhaling particulate matter immediately reduces your risk of a heart attack. And this is the same process that underpins the rise in heart attacks that you get on days of high pollution. And it's to do with the way that inhaling particulate matter causes your blood to become more prone to clotting. And so the moment you stop doing that, there's a benefit. That's important. Every cigarette that you don't smoke, every day that you don't smoke, is a cigarette that might have been the one that caused the DNA damage that finally triggered the lung cancer or the other cancer. So there's no harm ever in not smoking a cigarette. The only harm that there is in continuing to smoke one. So I want the smokers to always feel that this isn't a one-off. This isn't something you just do and then if it doesn't work out, that's a terrible shame. Rather that it's something that you stay in the game and you will succeed. So moving on, and I hope I'm still with you. Usually when you're talking in front of an audience, you can see whether people are asleep or not. But now, if you're doing your emails, I can't tell, but let's assume you're not. Okay, so let's say a little bit more about the SmokeFree formula. From my perspective, what I'm trying to do is to bring the science of stopping to smokers. We all know, you know and I know, but the smokers don't know. I bet they'd probably be a bit surprised to find out that billions of pounds and dollars has been spent on research aimed at helping them. We are really, those of us who work in this field, we're not anti-smoker, we're pro-smoker. That's why we do what we do. We want help smokers to stay alive and be happy and live productive lives. So and so do the public health community. So there's all this money that's been spent on this science, and yet the evidence is very clear, and you know this as well as I do, and it's true in Britain even, where there are huge campaigns out there to try to get people to stop in ways that are more effective. But there's still a huge knowledge gap. So what I wanted to do was to bring the science of stopping to smokers and to really encourage them to make use of this investment. This is their investment. Their taxpayers' pounds and dollars and yen and euros have gone into this research, and they should be reaping the benefits from it. Who's it for? It's for the smokers, first and foremost, who are thinking about stopping, and it's for them every time they try to stop, whether they're an e-cigarette user, whether they're trying cold turkey, whatever method they're using, every time they try to stop, this book will be with them as their guide. And there's a very important phrase which I use in the book, which is, I guide, you decide. It is not about telling smokers what to do, it's about giving them the information and allowing them to make their own tailored quit attempts using their own experience and the information I provide. It's also for stop smoking advisors. In the UK, we have something around 25,000 stop smoking advisors who are seeing smokers on a regular basis. And part of the reason for doing this webinar is to explore the possibility that a book like this could support what they do with their clients, so that if the clients have a copy and the advisor has a copy, they've got a common reference, a common point of contact, a common set of information, and also a common formula that they've agreed on that's going to be used in the quit attempt. And what I've found from stop smoking advisors who very kindly commented on the book is that they actually found it very helpful in terms of their own professional understanding, because the book it does really cover most of the top line evidence in the field, and also tries to convey it in a way that isn't limited to people who are scientists. And then the third category are, of course, health professionals more generally who are interested in encouraging their patients to stop, so that they can give the best possible advice. Because, as we all know, even if we offer really terrific behavioural support to smokers, probably still a majority of smokers are going to try it by themselves, and they may get a prescription, or they may use an e-cigarette, or they may use nicotine patches, or they may just use no medication but just try and go it with their own behavioural method. But it's very useful, I think, I hope, for health professionals out there to be aware of what they're doing and what's going to give them the best chance of success. So that's the sort of who it's for. One of my worries with a book like this was that it's going to be boring, and there's always a risk that it's going to be terribly worthy and no one's going to read it because it's just dull. And I have to say that the books that I've seen written by public health professionals and scientists on smoking, to me anyway, have fallen into that category. So I wanted to try and make this really different and to take a leaf out of the book of the more popular writers. So what I've done is to make it very personal. There's lots of stories about me, about the scientists who work in the field, about colleagues, about the studies that were done and why they were done and how they were done, so that people can see that this is not a faceless enterprise, all this work that's going on to try to help them and support them in stopping smoking, that there's real people out there who really care. And also to put in lots of stories from smokers and ex-smokers. And so what I did was I asked Jamie West, who was really helpful in putting this book together, to go out and interview long-term ex-smokers and find out about how they've done it. And what you get in the book is a sense of a huge variety of ways in which people stop. And then to link that up with the messages in the book, the ingredients that I'm going to talk about in a minute about the book. There's lots of activities, lots of questionnaires, quizzes, things, but not just for their own sake. Again, it'd be terribly easy to just make up a silly quiz of the sort that you get in a magazine. But actually what I've done is I've turned the questions that we use in our national surveys into quizzes, and not only then can the smokers see how they're responding on the quiz, but I can also give them real scientific data on what the population out there have said. Now this will, because our surveys are in England, this is obviously most relevant to England, but hopefully it will still be of interest to people in other countries. And then finally, in terms of the style, I make a very straightforward pledge, which is that if I say something is true, it will be backed by the science. And there's a website which people can go to where I cite the sources. I will state opinion, I do state opinion, and when I do, I make it clear that that's what it is. It is my opinion, and I won't sort of dress it up as though I had some sort of great evidence to support it. Okay, so that's a sort of that's a lot about what's behind the book, the style, why I wrote it, and so on. What I'd now like to do is just to, for the rest of this little presentation, just to talk about the content of the book and then where I see it going. So you should see on your screens that the book is in two parts. The first part is my attempt to get across all that knowledge that we've gained and understanding about why it is so hard for people to stop. Because there's a lot of misconceptions out there, and I know even a lot of health professionals don't really quite understand and what it is about smoking in particular. Because when you think about it, it's a little odd why it should be so hard to stop smoking, because nicotine is not a wonderfully psychoactive drug. It doesn't make you feel fantastic. It's not very powerful, and yet it is very addictive. And so the question is, what on earth is going on? And in the second part, and this is really the meat of the book, I list 29 ingredients that smokers can put into their smoke-free formula. And I give each one a star rating, which tells the reader the strength of the evidence to support it. And I'll tell you a bit more about that later, but let's just go into a little bit more about my version of the science behind this nicotine addiction. I start with looking at the reasons that people give as to why they smoke. And on the screen there, you'll see the results of very large national surveys that we've done as to the reasons that people in Britain anyway give as to why they smoke. And what you see is about 50% of smokers will report that they enjoy it, and that's a big factor. The next most important is stress relief, and we all know that smokers talk about this as a really important reason for smoking. relief from boredom is there, help with concentration, weight control, and socializing. All minor reasons, but still, relatively common for at least in certain sections. If you look at weight control, for example, it's the fact that it's only 10% is in some ways surprising. It's higher for women than men, but it's still only a minority. Now, so that's all fine, but the thing is, not a single one of these predicts success of failure or failure when the people try to stop. What we find is that enjoyment predicts whether or not people try to quit, but once they've got to the point of making a quit attempt, it doesn't predict whether they succeed or not. We recently published on that, and some of you may have seen the paper. So what on earth is going on? All these all these conscious reasons that people give for smoking are not really influencing whether or not they succeed when they come to stop. So it's something else, and this is my way of putting it. There's quite a strong evidence base for all this now, and you can dress it up in different ways, but this is the way that I want to try and communicate it to smokers and health professionals. The key thing is that when smokers try to stop, they experience urges to smoke. The term urge obviously has different meanings in different languages, but the experience from the point of view of the smoker is you feel this, it's somewhere between a desire and a compulsion, because it's got some sense of feeling that you've got to do something. So a lot of smokers will say, oh, if only I had something to do with my hands. So there's a sense of a need to engage in an activity. And that this overpowers and undermines their resolve to abstain. And overpowering and undermining are both really important, because with overpowering, what it does is it just simply knocks out their resolve. Their resolve just cannot take it. And it also undermines it, because what it means is that for a lot of smokers, they think, well, there's no point in bothering. This is it's just too hard. Why should I even try? So this is at the heart of the matter. And when you look at what predicts failure of quit attempts, overwhelmingly it's these urges to smoke. Even the other withdrawal symptoms show only modest relationships with relapse. The one that really shows the strongest effect is these urges to smoke. Where does that come from? It feels to the smoker like a very psychological thing, and also the smokers notice that they don't get it all the time, so they feel, well, it can't be like a normal drug addiction. It must be all up in my head. But it very much is related to the way that nicotine works on the brain. And the two key processes are that, first of all, nicotine causes dopamine release in the nucleus accumbens. What that does is it tells the brain, pay attention to what you were just doing and the situation in which you were in, and the next time you're in that situation, do that again. So it's a teaching signal. The dopamine release in the nucleus accumbens is a teaching signal which links the urge to smoke to smoking situations. What that means is you don't even have to be a regular smoker. You can be a non-daily smoker. You can be perfectly fine in situations where you don't normally smoke, but as soon as you come to a situation where smoking has been commonplace for you, this dopamine teaching signal has its effect, which creates this urge to smoke. So that's really important. Very important for smokers to understand this, because it helps them to realize why it is that they need to be very attentive to situations where they'd normally smoke. The second thing that nicotine does is it creates this thing which I call nicotine hunger, when brain levels go down. And I call it nicotine hunger because it actually, smokers often report it like a physical hunger in their gut. Even back in the early 1980s, when I started in this field, I was very struck by smokers reporting their cravings as a kind of as a hunger. And this is related to hypoactivity in the pathway, that dopamine pathway, which we were talking about, and it's chronic. And not everyone suffers to the same degree from both of these, but the people who are more susceptible to this nicotine hunger are, of course, those people who need to smoke when they first wake up in the morning, the people who score high on the FTND and the heaviness of smoking index. So those are the two sort of mechanisms. So you can boil this down from the point of view of a sort of non-specialist to a battle that is taking place between the human brain, which is clever and realizes that smoking is going to kill them, it's costing a lot of money, it's something they don't want to do, it's stigmatized, and the way that nicotine has infested and infected in a way and parasitized their animal brain, the mesolimbic dopamine pathway, and it's the conflict between those two and how that plays out that will determine what happens. So on the one hand, you've got the smoker saying, I really want to stop smoking, it's costing me money and it will probably kill me. And on the other hand, you've got the animal brain just saying, just smoke. And our job in helping people stop smoking is to help the human brain win out. So when the urge to smoke is stronger than the resolve and cigarettes are available, a lapse will occur. And so when someone tries to stop smoking, you've got these two lines tracing out with bumps there, with the situations causing an increase in the cravings, tiredness or alcohol causing a weakening of resolve. And at some point, if those two lines cross, there you have it. You have a lapse, and the lapse will almost inevitably lead to relapse. And our job is to keep those two lines apart. And that's the job of the smoker when they're trying to stop. So how do we do it? Well, that's where the ingredients come in. And this is, I'm just going to focus for most of the rest of the talk on this slide, which is just going to talk about the ingredients that I've chosen to put in the book and how best to use them. So each one has a star rating. If you look down the list, you'll see many of them that are very familiar to you. And I hope you'll agree, at least with most of them, about the star ratings that I've given them. But I'm just going to explain them to you before we go to questions. In-person support. This is the professional support, the stop smoking specialist support. There's now 50 randomized controlled trials which show that this is effective. And now, as some of you will know, Susan, Mickey and I and my team have been looking very closely at what the ingredients are, the active ingredients in this in-person support, and find that there are a number of elements which are really important, and we discuss those in the book. And one of the things that I think may be useful for someone using the book with their clients, so the client has a copy and the advisor has a copy, is that what I've done in the book is to sort of chart out what the evidence is telling us a good stop smoking session should look like. So it keeps everyone sort of focused on what are the behavior change techniques that the evidence is telling us are the ones that are most likely to help. We've also got nicotine replacement therapy, obviously, and in small letters there you'll see the word supported. And the reason for that is that some of you will be aware that we've recently published a very large study from population surveillance in England, in which we were very easily able to show an effect in the real world of in-person support, very easily able to show an effect in the real world of nicotine replacement therapy when given on prescription, but we just simply couldn't find an effect of nicotine replacement therapy when it was just bought over the counter from a shop with no behavioral support. And we've done further work on this. We needed to check this result, and whichever way you look at it, we're finding that an NRT just simply bought over the counter in England is not helping smokers to stop. Now that, I think, makes material like the book and the advice that health professionals can give even more important. We all know that nicotine replacement therapy works. It helps people to stop smoking. So what's going on? The most likely explanation, to my mind, is that when people use it without any professional support, they're not using enough, they're not using it long enough, and they're coming to it with the wrong expectations. We know that it can help when people set a quit date, when they have a clear commitment to that quit date, and when they use the medication as prescribed for the correct duration. I guess we just have to think of it like antibiotics, that you wouldn't expect antibiotics to work if you just took 2 tablets instead of the full course for 3 days or 5 days or 2 weeks or whatever. So we need to pay a lot of attention, and I do stress it quite a lot in this book, to trying to encourage and support people to using their nicotine replacement therapy effectively. Champix, of course, gets 3 stars. And I also go into the findings that Champix has been found to be more effective than nicotine replacement therapy in single form and than Zyban, and raise the issue about whether Champix is better than dual form NRT. And in the bit about NRT, I would always recommend users to use a patch plus a faster acting form. I think the evidence at the moment tells us that dual form NRT or Champix are the medications of choice where these are available. I've also, you'll notice, put in cytosine. Cytosine is actually available in about 30 countries around the world, and some of you may not have heard of it, but most of you probably have. It's now becoming much better known, but it was actually the first stop smoking drug that was ever available. And the great thing about it is it's incredibly cheap, or it used to be, and will be soon because it's generic. Quitline in this chart only got 2 stars rather than 3, and it's not that there isn't very, very good randomized trial evidence to support it. It's just that in the UK in particular, we haven't got any positive trials. In fact, the only trials that have been done in the UK have actually been negative. And I think that we need to pay very close attention now to how the quitline is run, what's in it, and look very closely at the behavior change techniques that are used, because clearly there is huge variability and we need to find a way of making the quitlines as effective as they can be. Internet similarly has some evidence to support it, but it's not as strong as it is for these other things, as is text messaging, books and booklets. E-cigarettes, controversial obviously. I've given them 2 stars, but I would expect over the course of this year that they would probably end up with 3. We've got a study which is under review at the moment, which is looking like in the real world the e-cigarette uses in the UK is proving a little bit more effective, well actually substantially more effective I have to say, than nicotine replacement therapy bought from a shop. Not from behavioral support, but from nicotine replacement bought from a shop. There's some evidence for glucose. I won't go into the details. There's lots of other things. The only other one I want to talk about before I finish is abrupt cessation versus gradual, which gets 3 stars. Now, there is a Cochrane review on this, which didn't conclude that there was evidence for them for a benefit to abrupt cessation, but there's a large clinical trial which is under review at the moment, which I happen to know about being one of the authors, which does show a clear benefit to abrupt cessation. And in the real world studies that have been done, many times you see a huge benefit for abrupt cessation over gradual, really astonishingly large. And so I think it would be remiss not to recommend that to smokers. Now, they may not want to do it abruptly, they may not feel able to, but I think we do have a duty to tell them about it. And then there's lots of ones you'll see with 1 star, because the truth is that we don't have good evidence to support them yet, including smartphone apps. Hopefully, if we carry on doing research, we will, but then we'll change the star rating. And then just to finish, I put together a website to go with the book, and it'd be great if you would have a look and let me have any comments, because right now it's being revamped. I realise that there's a lot of things that need doing to it, so any comments you've got would be terrifically useful. One of the things that I do in the website is to list all the ingredients, and then when users log into the website, they tell us what ingredients they're using, and then they report their success, and that feeds into this page, which is actually updated every evening, so they can see for every ingredient its popularity, its success rates. I give the sources, and I also provide updates on any new evidence that's coming up about them. The book was released in the UK in January, and in Australia and New Zealand, and so it's available from those places. We've got translation editions coming out over the course of the next year, and I'm sure there'll be quite a lot of others. But the ones we've got so far are Spanish for Spain and Latin America, German, Dutch, Russian, Norwegian, Romanian, and then we're in the process of doing the US adaptation now, so that will be available later in the year as well. I'm obviously keen to get reactions to it, and my agents are obviously working hard to get the book into other countries. But if it's not available in your country, then I guess what I would always suggest is going to amazon.co.uk or write to me. That's it. I think I've gone on longer than I intended, but I hope that there's some questions and it's stimulated some food for thought. Thank you very much indeed for listening and putting up with my my ranting. And when I look away like this, it's because I need to go back to the webcam so I can see whether I'm still here. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hey, thank you so much, Robert. We have got a few questions, and anyone else that has questions, feel free to submit them in the questions panel, but we will get started. So some of these were answered during the presentation, but Noel Baxter, and I apologize if I get anyone's names wrong, but asks, what reading age is required to be able to grasp the information in this book?
Very good question. I haven't done a reading age test on it, but I would imagine that it would be about 15, 16, something like that. I get very generous comments from readers from all walks of life who take the trouble to email me, and so I don't think, I mean, clearly a book like this is, any book is going to be more of a sort of thing that's going to appeal to more educated people, but I hope that it has attraction for people who are not so educated. Interestingly, precisely because of the issue around this and concern about it, I'm working now with the publishers on a shorter version, and one which I think may appeal to people who don't want to read a book. So I kind of wrote this book to be a book, not just a sort of guide to stop smoking, but something that that would be a popular science book and would be interesting whether or not people smoked or not. So I think there is room for a book which really just cuts to the chase, cuts out the sort of the stories and the jokes and stuff like that, and just gets down to the nitty-gritty. So that's what we're working on at the moment.
Great. So this is from Paul Hooper. He says, I know you wanted the book to be positive, but are there negative star ingredients that should be avoided?
Well, actually, yes, there are. So at the back of the book, I've got an appendix which says things I don't think will help. And there are a few in there. Aromatherapy is in there. Lobeline, because that's been studied, laser therapy, naltrexone. I know that there's been some research on this, and and unfortunately so far I have to say nicotine vaccines. So there's a few there. Interestingly, when I was writing the book, I was fully expecting hypnotherapy to be in there as well. And then I refreshed my memory on the Cochrane Review, and it does actually, I mean, there's very few studies on hypnotherapy, but the odds ratio is about 1.5 relative to brief advice. So I don't recommend, I haven't recommended it. I actually use it as a way of discussing what science is and how we use science to try to form judgments on these things. But I have to say that maybe there's a research project for someone in the future to have a look more into hypnotherapy. It seems better than brief advice, no different in the randomized trials from a more extended discussion with smokers, but then maybe that's okay. Acupuncture, I don't think, well, the evidence isn't positive on that either.
Great, thanks. From Gustavo Zabert, we have a question. Have you considered exploring the impact of motivation in smokers? Yeah,
we do. In our research, actually, we're looking at this quite a lot. Hello, Gustavo. I look forward to seeing you later in the year in person. I'm really looking forward to the trip to Montevideo, and then we'll be popping over to Buenos Aires. So it'll be really good fun. Yes, motivation is such an interesting issue, and what we find in our research is it's a bit like what I said about enjoyment. Measures of motivation typically get you to the starting gate. So we find that people who are more highly motivated to stop are more likely, when we follow them up, to have had a go at stopping. But strangely, once they've made a quit attempt, we find that the level of motivation at the start of the quit attempt is not predictive of whether or not they go on to relapse. The thing that consistently keeps predicting whether or not they relapse are various measures of dependence, like FTND, or we have a measure which is based on strength of urges to smoke. There are other things as well. Obviously, there's structural factors, social grade, lifestyle circumstances, living with a smoker, and so on. But in terms of the internal factors, motivation doesn't seem to be coming out as a major player. Now, I don't think that means that motivation isn't important, because the whole thing is fundamentally about motivation. But it's about the way that motivation changes over time and how it can get undermined by dependence and by these hungers and this animal brain. So when we talk about motivation, very often what we're talking about is people's conscious motivation and their feeling that they really would like to do something, but then against that is you're getting this force driving up from under these urges which are being driven by the smoking, which seem to be very powerful. So I do talk about it quite a bit in the book, and I think it is really important. But I think it's important for smokers to recognise that it's not enough to really want to stop smoking. That's not enough. You've got to give yourself the best chance of stopping by doing all the various things that are going to help to address the dependence.
All right. So we have a question from Guido Bergman asking about clonidine. And if that should be included.
Okay. Yeah. So clonidine. Why isn't clonidine in? I believe that there are people who use it in the States, but I don't think it's generally treated as it's not widely used. I haven't included it in the UK version because it just doesn't figure. There's no, it's not licensed. No one would even imagine that you would use clonidine. The side effects, the sedation, so on, would be a big issue. And why would you when we've got medications that are at least as good, if not better? I think you've made a very good point for me for the US version that I should include something on clonidine, and I'd be interested in your views. I'd probably give it 2 stars rather than 3, because although I know that there is randomized controlled trial evidence which supports its efficacy, I also happen to know that there's a few studies that haven't been published which didn't find a positive result. So on balance, I'm not convinced that the effects are universal, and I think many people would have concerns about the sedation and the side effects. And when we already have Champix and a dual form NRT, again, do email me if you think that I'm wrong on this, but I don't think I would be recommending it.
All right, thank you. Daniel Sejas has several questions. One is there any editing by any ex-smokers, both in language and in the approach?
That's a really good point. Not direct editing in the sense of, did I give them the book and get them to put a red line through it, but very much so. In fact, not really trusting myself to be able to write for a popular audience, being an academic. I wouldn't have done the book if it hadn't been for getting the support of and co-writing, and they get full, credits in the copyright from Jamie West, my son, who's a musician and a writer, and he knows how I think, but he's not a scientist. So in fact, he's very much not a scientist because he's a musician. And also his partner, who's a recent ex-smoker, and a whole bunch of others. But also a guy called Chris Smythe, who's the health correspondent for the Times newspaper, and he was very helpful in trying to shape what I was trying to say into something that hopefully people would find interesting and engaging. But we were the point about getting input from smokers is really important, and we did get a lot of input from not only actually from smokers, current smokers, ex-smokers, but also from health professionals, stop smoking advisors, who see smokers obviously on a daily basis and know what their concerns are.
Great. Another question from Daniel. Do you include any self-evaluation scales for readers for anxiety or for depression that might ask them to get help if they need it?
No, that's a really good point. There is a section at the back of the book about particular groups of smokers, like what if I, and it does include people, it does include what if I don't smoke every day, for example? What if I have an illness caused by smoking? What if I have alcohol problems? What if I use illicit drugs? And on the bit about what if I suffer from mental health problems, what I do is obviously try and communicate the evidence on this for them, one of which I think is a really important point about the fact that stopping smoking is not going to make their mental health problems worse. But also pointing them in the direction of ideally, first of all, get professional help, from a clinical psychologist. Usually it would be in this country. Or even if, because sometimes there are long waiting lists or they don't want to see someone, then we do actually have available, which they're not universally available, but you can get registered to use them. It doesn't cost anything. Some of these websites that, like Beating the Blues, that have been endorsed by NICE. So I don't, in the book, get directly into the issue of self-assessment for depression and then what to do about it, but rather to say that, well, people generally know when they're depressed and how bad it is, and try and point them in the right direction.
Great, thank you. Is there anything in the book about combinations besides Zyban and nicotine, so other combination therapies?
Yeah, well, I do talk a bit about the evidence on combining varenicline. I think I'm just trying to remember varenicline and nicotine and Zyban and NRT. So the evidence on that so far, you know, as you'll be aware, is not particularly strong. But there is this new study which was reported in JAMA earlier in the year, which was too late for the book, but of course, having the website attached to it, I can, you know, it allows me to do an update, and then the US version, and it will be in that, which is pretty convincing evidence from a large randomized trial that adding Zyban to varenicline can improve success rates in heavier smokers. So, and given, you know, we are talking about safe drugs here, the cost benefit of doing that, I think, is very much in favor of recommending people to do it. So if anyone smoked 20 or more cigarettes a day now and they were taking varenicline, I would definitely offer them the prospect of using Zyban as well, even though it is just the one study, because I think the results look quite good, well, very good actually. But the other combinations I discuss, and again, always very happy to receive emails and be correct on it, but my reading of the literature, and we recently published quite a large randomized controlled trial on Zyban and NRT, was that that particular combination was not showing a benefit over those medications on their own.
All right. Is there any information about chewing tobacco, or of quitting chewing tobacco as well as smoking tobacco, or is this applicable for that?
I wish. That's a really, again, you know, very, very good point. And I think now you mention it, I think in translation editions for India and Middle East and other countries, we should make some mention of other forms of tobacco use. But the book does only focus on cigarettes, unfortunately. We recently did a large randomized trial in Delhi, headed up by an Indian public health doctor called Behaviour, who was doing a PhD with me, where we looked at brief advice in outreach in slum areas of Delhi, and with smokeless tobacco and smoking, and showed an effect. So, you know, and as you know, there are increasingly studies coming out on smokeless tobacco and how people can be supported to stop using it. So that's definitely something that we will need to pay attention to.
Great. This is more of a comment from Mira Agi. She says that she's using the book Working with a Software Engineer without any medication, and that his response is very encouraging.
Oh, thank you.
Very slow and deliberate, but he really wants to succeed. So.
Oh, that's really kind. Now, hello, hi, Mira. Great to hear from you.
All right, and it looks like we're running out of time, but one last sort of fun question: how many stars for Alan Carr's book?
Good question. Do you know what? Well, before I answer, everyone on the call, I would like for them to think about how many stars they would give it, and then I will say what I think. I do talk about Alan Carr's book in the book. Okay, are we ready? I would give it 2. I think that there is reason to believe that it will be effective, and there are some studies, unfortunately and very frustratingly, when they do these studies, they don't do them to the sort of standard that we would normally require with, when we do all the sorts of randomized trials that we do. But I'm looking at the Alan Carr method in our real-world studies in the UK, and it's looking quite positive. And I think the concept behind it is something we can all engage with, the idea that if you can really convince yourself that smoking is doing nothing for you, then it's a really important stepping stone to being able to get rid of it altogether. And I think some people can. The trouble is that I think a hell of a lot of people, even if they make that mental switch, it isn't enough to convince the animal part of their brain that's been so conditioned by nicotine. So I would I think we will find in the years to come that the Ankar method is better. It is effective. It's not as effective as Ankar claims it is, but I mean, but that would be fantastic if it was. It's effective, but it is only one method, and that's really the key message of this book, which is that smokers have got to find the method that works for them. That fortunately they don't just get one go at it; they get many goes. And when they're searching for a method, if they're given the best possible information on what the science can tell them, then they're giving themselves the best possible chance. It's not about just doing it in one way. That's for sure.
All right. Well, thank you very much. There were a few questions that didn't get answered. Robert, I don't know if you want to provide your email. Was your email on the first slide? Maybe you can.
Almost everyone will either know my email
okay.
who's on the call,
well,
or be able to look it up. But I'll tell you now. If you email robertwest100@gmail.com, and I will respond to your questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. West, and thank you everyone for being on the call. And like I said, this will be available on the website later this week. And we would really appreciate it if you would take the survey after the webinar, although I do understand that everyone is busy. So
we're all busy. Thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.